Strength is often misunderstood, particularly in the political and military sense. Many people equate strength with raw aggression, with the capacity to inflict damage, with the willingness to dominate. But true strength is something deeper, something rooted not in destruction but in responsibility. A strong nation, or a strong individual, does not prove itself by recklessness, but by discipline, by the willingness to carry a burden. Pakistan's strike was not simply an act of retaliation. It was a statement of sovereignty tempered by careful restraint. The decision was not just to show capability, but to show control. Because without control, power collapses into chaos. And when chaos takes over, nations and people alike are destroyed. Responsibility means carrying the weight of potential destruction without surrendering to the temptation of using it rashly. Imagine the situation: two nuclear-armed neighbors, each capable of annihilation, staring into the abyss of war. The easy path would have been escalation, to unleash aggression, to prove superiority by force. But that is not strength. It is the failure of responsibility. Responsibility demands calculation, and it demands wisdom. It requires leaders to act not only for today, but for generations yet unborn. Pakistan's strike, measured and precise, communicated something vital. That defense is not the same as destruction. That strength can be shown without unraveling civilization itself, and that is the hardest balance to achieve. Every individual can learn from this principle, because the same applies in our personal lives. You might have the capacity for anger, for vengeance, for destruction in your relationships, in your career, in your struggles. But if you let those impulses guide you, you will ruin everything that matters. To be strong is to recognize your power, but to choose carefully how you use it. That's why responsibility is the foundation of strength. Without it, aggression consumes you, and you become dangerous to yourself and everyone around you. A nation without responsibility invites collapse, just as a person without responsibility invites ruin. The difference between strength and aggression is the difference between order and chaos, and order, though difficult, is the only foundation for survival. We often think aggression is a sign of courage, but it isn't. Aggression is usually born of fear, of insecurity, of the inability to master oneself. Courage, on the other hand, is responsibility in action. To take a stand while maintaining restraint, that is courageous. Pakistan's strike illustrated courage, not blind fury but controlled action. It showed the world that the nation had both the capability to respond and the wisdom not to escalate into catastrophe. This is exactly what strength demands: the capacity to act when necessary, and the maturity to stop when further action would destroy the future. Without that, there is only war without meaning. With it, there is the possibility of peace. Think about how this principle applies when you are faced with conflict in your own life. Perhaps someone insults you, betrays you, challenges your dignity. You have the power to lash out, to humiliate them, to escalate the conflict. But what would that prove? You may win the moment, but you will lose the larger battle for stability, for peace, for respect. True strength is in holding back, in measuring your response so that it defends your integrity without annihilating the other. This is not weakness. It is responsibility. Weakness is the inability to act at all. Aggression is the inability to stop. Strength is the balance, the ability to act decisively while carrying the heavy weight of restraint. That balance is what Pakistan displayed, and it is what each of us must aim for. Responsibility is heavy, and that's why so many avoid it. To carry responsibility means to accept the possibility of consequences, to know that your decisions can change the course of history. That weight can be unbearable, but it is what defines true leadership. Aggression is the refusal to carry that weight, the reckless abdication of responsibility. It says, I will do what I want and let the future burn. Responsibility says, I will act carefully because I hold in my hands the lives of countless others. That is the path of maturity. Pakistan's leaders, in that moment, understood the difference. They demonstrated not recklessness, but responsibility. And the world noticed, because responsibility, in the face of aggression, always stands out. The ability to restrain is what separates civilization from barbarism. Every society, every nation, every individual possesses destructive potential. The question is not whether you have power, but whether you can control it. Civilization is built when that destructive capacity is harnessed responsibly, when it is used to protect rather than to destroy. Pakistan's strike showed that power could be expressed without tipping into chaos. It was precise, deliberate, and purposeful. This is why the act shook the world. It was not just the force behind it, but the responsibility guiding it. Responsibility transforms violence into order, transforms power into legitimacy. Without responsibility, strength is nothing more than brutality. With it, strength becomes civilization itself. In the end, strength rooted in responsibility forces others to respect you. Aggression breeds fear, but fear is temporary. Responsibility earns respect, and respect is lasting. Nations, like people, survive not by being feared, but by being respected. Pakistan's strike demonstrated responsibility under immense pressure, and it shifted the global conversation. Even world leaders who might not have been sympathetic were forced to acknowledge the maturity of that choice. Responsibility commands the attention of those who value order, and it compels even adversaries to reconsider their assumptions. This is the essence of true power, not domination, but the respect that emerges from responsibility. And that respect is far stronger than any weapon. Chaos is the natural state of the world when conflict erupts. The moment two nations armed to the teeth face each other with fury, the line between order and annihilation becomes razor thin. In such circumstances, fear takes hold not only of the masses, but also of leaders who know the burden of their choices. Fear whispers for escalation because aggression often feels like the simplest path to control. Yet control built on fear is an illusion, as it collapses into destruction the moment it is tested. Courage is the antidote to this descent into chaos. It is courage that insists upon clarity when fear clouds judgment. It is courage that says, we will not let chaos dictate our destiny. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act responsibly despite fear's overwhelming presence. Pakistan's strike was a manifestation of this principle because it was carried out in the midst of global tension, where every move could ignite a larger war. It would have been easy to unleash indiscriminate force, to try and terrify the adversary through overwhelming destruction. But that would have been cowardice disguised as bravery, a surrender to chaos masquerading as power. Courage, in contrast, lies in doing what is necessary and nothing more. To strike precisely, to limit escalation, to respond without plunging into madness. That is courage in its highest form. And courage brings order where fear would only invite catastrophe. History is full of examples where fear-driven aggression destroyed entire civilizations. Leaders who mistook recklessness for strength plunged their nations into decades of suffering. And on the other side, civilizations that restrained their might responsibly often survived and thrived. This is the universal principle. Order emerges when courage tempers power with wisdom. When Pakistan responded with measured action, it upheld this principle. It revealed that courage is not blind violence, but disciplined restraint. Courage is the act of refusing to let chaos take the driver's seat. Courage is the invisible shield that guards against the collapse of everything valuable. Without it, History is nothing more than a graveyard of arrogance and fear. What is true for nations is equally true for individuals. Every person faces moments of chaos, moments where fear tempts you into rash decisions that will ruin your life. Perhaps it's a moment of anger where you lash out and destroy a relationship, or a moment of despair where you make choices that shatter your future. In such times, it is not aggression that saves you, but courage. Courage means holding steady when everything inside you screams for impulsive action. Courage means creating order in the storm of chaos that threatens to consume you. And just as nations can avert disaster through courage, so too can individuals redirect their lives. The lesson is universal. Courage is the foundation of order. Chaos always offers an easy excuse to abandon responsibility. It tells you that the world is too unpredictable, that the pressure is too great, that restraint is pointless. But those who listen to chaos lose everything, because they hand over their agency to fear. Courage demands something harder: to remain steady, to resist escalation, to act as though your choices matter. Pakistan's strike demonstrated this by refusing the easy path of destruction. It was not chaos that guided the action, but the courage to maintain balance. And that is precisely why the world took notice, because the world, in its heart, admires courage more than aggression. Courage shines brightest in moments when chaos seems overwhelming. The ripple effect of courage extends beyond the moment itself. A measured act of courage changes not only the immediate situation, but also the psychological framework of everyone watching. When Pakistan acted with discipline, it reminded the world that courage can stand against chaos, even in the nuclear age. The strike created a ripple that moved beyond military strategy. It influenced how nations perceive restraint as power. And this ripple shapes future decisions, because once courage has shown itself possible, others begin to consider it a viable path. The world learns that courage is not weakness, but an organizing principle. And with every ripple, order gains ground against chaos. Courage, however, is not comfortable. It demands sacrifice, because to act with restraint is to bear the heavy weight of potential consequences. You cannot act courageously without first confronting fear head on. Pakistan's strike was made under the unbearable pressure of possible retaliation, international scrutiny, and catastrophic escalation. Yet courage carried the weight of these fears without surrendering to them. This is what makes courage so rare. It asks you to hold responsibility even when it could crush you. It asks you to resist the easy gratification of reckless aggression. And it asks you to shoulder the burden of possible failure. Only then does order emerge from chaos, because order requires someone willing to bear the load. The world is always watching when chaos threatens to spiral out of control. Every action taken in such moments becomes an example, either of recklessness or of courage. Pakistan's strike became an example of the latter. The restraint it displayed sent a message louder than the strike itself, that order can exist even when chaos looms large. This message reached beyond borders, compelling other nations to rethink their assumptions about power. Because true power is not in amplifying chaos, but in creating order out of it. That is the essence of leadership, the courage to step forward into uncertainty and to act in a way that brings clarity, not destruction. And that is why courage remains the highest virtue in moments of crisis. Every individual should reflect on this. Where is chaos threatening your own life, and how are you responding to it? Do you let fear dictate your choices, pushing you toward aggression or despair? Or do you summon courage, the kind that can create order in the midst of turmoil? The lesson of Pakistan's strike is not merely geopolitical, it is existential. It shows us that courage can hold the line against chaos when all else seems lost. And in your own struggles, whether large or small, the same holds true. If you want order in your life, If you want to withstand the storms that come, then courage must guide you. Because chaos is always at the door, but courage decides whether it enters. History often turns on single moments that appear small but carry unimaginable weight. A single decision, a single action, can redirect the destiny of nations for generations. Pakistan's strike was such a moment, because it demonstrated how one measured act can alter the global balance of power. It reminded the world that history is not always shaped by overwhelming force, but by precise actions taken with clarity and intent. The ripples of that act extended far beyond the battlefield. They reached the political chambers of the most powerful nations. Even the United States, with its immense influence, was compelled to intervene. One act shifted global dialogue, proving that history bends not under quantity of force but under quality of decision. Such is the power of decisive responsibility. One strike, one choice, redirected the course of events. This principle applies across all domains of life. The ripple of one act can change everything. People imagine that their decisions are insignificant, that their actions do not matter in the grand scheme of things. But history shows us repeatedly that this is false. The courage of one individual can spark revolutions. The misstep of one leader can lead to collapse. One strike can alter the balance between war and peace. In your life, one decision, to act responsibly, to stand for what is right, can change your trajectory forever. Never underestimate the power of the single act. It is through these ripples that destiny unfolds. The world is not shaped by abstractions, but by choices made in moments of intense pressure. And every choice carries consequences far beyond the moment itself. The strike was more than a military maneuver. It was a psychological statement to the world. It announced that Pakistan would not be ignored, that its sovereignty was not negotiable, and that its will to act was tempered by discipline. The message was not merely for the adversary, it was for every observer across the globe. The ripple spread outward, influencing perceptions, recalibrating strategies, and forcing even those far removed from the conflict to reconsider their positions. This is how history changes, through the symbolic weight of a single act. Nations do not exist in isolation. Every move becomes a part of the collective memory of humanity. Pakistan's action entered that memory, and it will not be erased. The ripple continues, shaping narratives and decisions long after the act itself. Consider the irony. Massive armies, vast economies, and powerful alliances stood in the background. Yet it was one carefully executed strike that shifted the narrative. This shows us that power is not merely about size, but about precision and timing. The ripple effect of one act can reach further than the roar of an entire army. That is why responsibility in decision-making is so crucial. You never truly know the extent of the consequences that will follow your choices. A moment of clarity can rescue a nation from despair, just as a moment of recklessness can plunge it into destruction. The strike demonstrated clarity. It was not about annihilation. It was about altering the direction of history with one decisive move. And the world had no choice but to acknowledge it. This same principle holds in your personal life. One decision to turn away from destructive habits can transform everything. One step toward responsibility can alter your entire future. People often wait for large transformations, thinking that change comes in dramatic waves. But change more often comes from small, deliberate acts whose ripples expand outward. The ripple of choosing honesty over deceit. The ripple of taking responsibility rather than hiding in denial. The ripple of facing fear instead of running from it. These are small acts, but they reshape the structure of your life. And like nations on the brink of war, you must recognize that one act of courage can redirect everything. That is why personal responsibility is so powerful. It creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can immediately see. The ripple of Pakistan's strike did something extraordinary. It compelled the involvement of global powers. Even the President of the United States was forced to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. This was not because of overwhelming destruction, but because of the meaning embedded in the act. Meaning more than force compels attention. When an act is imbued with responsibility and clarity, it resonates across borders and cultures. That resonance draws the gaze of the powerful and forces them to engage. The ripple works not only through material impact, but through psychological significance. That is why nations, like individuals, must act with intention. Because the world responds not only to what you do, but to what your actions mean. And meaning is the force that shakes the world. Ripples are unpredictable, and that is both their danger and their power. A single act can unleash chaos just as easily as it can restore order. That is why restraint is so vital. The ripple of Pakistan's strike might have ignited uncontrollable escalation if not carefully measured. But because it was disciplined, it produced order instead of catastrophe. This lesson is critical for individuals as well. When you act, you unleash ripples in your relationships, your family, your community. The nature of those ripples depends on your discipline. If you act recklessly, you create chaos that spreads outward. If you act responsibly, you create order that multiplies. The strike proved that responsibility shapes ripples toward stability, and that truth is as relevant to individuals as it is to nations. History is not a straight line. It is shaped by the intersections of countless ripples. At times, one ripple dominates, redirecting the course of events in profound ways. Pakistan's strike became one of those intersections. It collided with existing tensions, reshaped alliances, and forced powerful leaders to reconsider their strategies. The ripple did not remain contained. It intertwined with the global order itself. This shows us that no act exists in isolation. Every decision contributes to the larger fabric of history, and in that fabric, some threads shine brighter than others. The strike became such a thread, woven permanently into the narrative of world events. And that permanence was achieved not through aggression alone, but through the responsibility behind the act. The lesson for every person is clear: do not underestimate the power of your actions. The ripple effect is real, and it operates whether you recognize it or not. When you act with irresponsibility, you spread disorder far beyond your immediate reach. When you act with responsibility, you spread stability and order. The strike demonstrated that principle on a global scale, but the same principle applies in every life, every family, every community. One act of discipline can break a cycle of chaos. One moment of clarity can open doors to new futures. The world changes not only through grand revolutions, but through ripples created by individuals who act with courage. And that is the ultimate truth. History is shaped one act at a time. Power is often mistaken for the ability to unleash destruction without limit. People believe that strength lies in overwhelming force, in the capacity to reduce an enemy to rubble. But such an understanding of power is shallow, because destruction is easy. Any fool can burn down a house, but it takes wisdom, discipline, and restraint to build one. The same applies to nations. The ultimate expression of power is not in how much devastation you can cause, but in how much devastation you can prevent. Restraint in the face of capability, that is real strength. Pakistan's strike showed the world this principle in action. It demonstrated that true power lies in measured responsibility, not reckless annihilation. Think of the paradox: the more destructive capacity you hold, the greater the demand for restraint. Nuclear weapons, advanced technology, and vast armies are tools of unimaginable destruction. Yet what defines a nation's maturity is not its possession of these tools, but its ability to keep them unused. Power becomes legitimate only when it is guided by responsibility. Pakistan's strike was not a display of unchecked aggression, but of careful calculation. It said to the world, "We can act, but we choose to act responsibly." This balance separates civilization from barbarism. Because barbarism is simply the absence of restraint. Civilization is the choice to prevent destruction when destruction is fully possible. And this choice is the measure of greatness. Restraint requires enormous strength because it demands mastery over instinct. The instinct in moments of conflict is escalation, to strike harder, to dominate without limit. But if nations or individuals always surrendered to instinct, the result would be endless cycles of destruction. The human story would collapse under the weight of vengeance. Restraint interrupts that cycle. It declares that strength is not about giving in to impulse, but about governing it. Pakistan's action was not impulsive, it was intentional, targeted, and measured. That is why it commanded respect. Because anyone can destroy, but not everyone can stop themselves from destroying. The ability to stop is what earns lasting recognition. And recognition matters more than intimidation. At the level of personal life, the same principle is true. You may have the ability to hurt, to lash out in anger, to make others suffer. But real power is not in proving that you can hurt people. It is in demonstrating that you can refrain. The person who restrains their destructive capacity is stronger than the person who explodes without control. This is why self-mastery is the highest form of power. If you cannot govern yourself, you cannot govern anything else. Restraint transforms you from a danger into a leader. It builds trust, respect, and influence. Without it, you are nothing more than a tyrant in your own life. And tyranny always collapses under its own weight. Restraint is strength in its most disciplined form. Destruction can generate fear, but fear is fragile. It lasts only as long as the threat looms immediately overhead. Once the storm passes, fear fades, and those who relied upon it are forgotten or despised. But respect endures, because respect is born from restraint. When Pakistan showed the world that it could act decisively while preventing larger destruction, it earned respect. That respect was not only from allies, but even from adversaries. Respect compels recognition. It ensures that a nation's voice cannot be ignored. This is why restraint is ultimately more powerful than aggression. Aggression isolates, but restraint integrates. It weaves a nation into the fabric of global order by showing responsibility. And responsibility is the foundation of lasting influence. The world is constantly balancing between destruction and preservation. Every nation faces the temptation to expand its influence by force. Yet history has shown that empires built on aggression collapse, while nations that temper their power with restraint endure. Pakistan's strike exemplified this truth, showing that even in moments of extreme tension, the choice for restraint is possible. And this choice reshapes the global conversation. Leaders and nations are forced to respect the actor that chooses restraint while maintaining strength. Because they know that behind restraint lies capability, and capability with restraint is far more terrifying than reckless aggression. It communicates stability, and stability is what the world craves amidst chaos. Restraint is also deeply moral. It recognizes the sanctity of life and the cost of unnecessary destruction. It accepts that every act of violence unleashes suffering that cannot be fully controlled. When Pakistan acted with restraint, it carried the weight of moral responsibility. It did not deny its ability to cause devastation, but it chose a different path. That choice revealed not weakness, but moral clarity. It showed the difference between using power to protect and using power to destroy. And the world took notice, because morality in international affairs is rare. Yet morality is what gives nations legitimacy. Without it, even the most powerful states lose credibility. Restraint, therefore, is not only strategic, but ethical. And ethics matter more than raw power in the long arc of history. Restraint must not be confused with weakness. Weakness is the inability to act at all, the absence of capacity. Restraint is the conscious refusal to unleash a power you fully possess. Weakness invites exploitation, but restraint commands respect. Weakness is vulnerability, while restraint is sovereignty. Pakistan's strike illustrated this distinction with precision. It made clear that the nation was neither powerless nor reckless. It was capable and deliberate. This distinction is what separates the respected from the ignored, because the world does not respect weakness, and it does not respect recklessness either. It respects the rare combination of power and restraint. That combination is what gives a nation, or a person, the ability to shape events beyond their immediate sphere. Every individual must learn to practice restraint in the same way. You might be tempted to dominate others with whatever power you hold, your words, your authority, your influence. But domination erodes trust and destroys relationships. Restraint, by contrast, cultivates stability and respect. It allows you to maintain strength without losing humanity. The same principle that applied to Pakistan's strike applies to your own life. You must ask yourself, are you capable of restraint? Can you carry power without abusing it? Can you hold back even when you know you could win through destruction? If you can, then you are strong. If you cannot, then you are enslaved to your own impulses, and that is weakness disguised as strength. Restraint is the mark of those who understand the weight of responsibility. It is what allows nations to avoid wars and individuals to avoid tragedies. It is the highest expression of maturity because it shows mastery over chaos. Pakistan's strike made this visible on the world stage. It was not the destruction that shocked the world but the control. Control in the face of potential catastrophe is the clearest signal of true power. Because anyone can destroy when pressed, but to hold back destruction when you have every reason to unleash it, that is rare. And rarity is what makes restraint so powerful. The world respects it, remembers it, and learns from it.